Hello, and welcome to my presentation about open source spirit, elevating team collaboration and innovation. My name is Leo, and I'm contributing now for quite some time to open source projects and communities, building communities, and so on. And I would like to, just talk about how open source does innovation in a way, right? I think there's a lot that we can also learn working at our companies, not just about the technology that we can use. Open source is not just about the tech that we develop, but also its sort of collaborative nature, and how it leads to innovation as well. I think that's very interesting, and we will talk about this. First of all, this is an experience report, so everybody has, I'm sure in tech, some involvement with open source in some ways. Doing university, if you're in university, all basically programming languages and so on, and libraries and all this stuff, you encounter open source very early or later in at work if you consider maybe using an open source library or building one your own. Maybe you've also been to a conference. There are a lot of different impressions and ideas and different facades. But if you have like any comments on this presentation, feel free to contact me. Very happy to learn your point of view. Right. So if we take like a broad approach, what is like the open source spirit? I think we need to start with the engineers, sort of the idea to change software, to learn about software, to tinker, to experiment, and also share the work with others, right? And I think in software there's like a couple of points why this is quite easy to do. And I think first of all, software is information, and information is something that you do not ultimately earn. It's something that you can share with others. It's fine. You have the information, others have the information too, but there are some parts of information you don't want to share. These are probably your business secrets or something, I don't know, like some algorithms, how you do certain things. Or maybe it's like part of the hardware, right? Right, so I think like first of all, this is like one of the core reasons. And another one is that you can share software with minimal cost. It is possible that you like build software, release it, and others adopt the software, and at the end you have like made your impact in digital space. And you can do this with just a laptop. People at major tech companies may have the same laptop, do their work. You're in university, or you're, I don't know, at your business, you have the same setup. It's not really about, I mean, in some ways it is, but usually it's not about the hardware. The requirements to shape the digital space are relatively low. And I think these two together, there are a lot of more things to this, but already are kind of like a core reason why open source is possible in software and maybe not in some other spaces. Right, so basically you have like a straight line. You have a straight line from the left, you wonder about stuff, you're very interested in learning more about it. Right to the right, where you do innovation and you want to shape stuff. And there are not a lot of obstacles, right? The only obstacle is maybe, I don't know, you're interested in something else and then you do something else, whatever. But you can follow this path and come up with good ideas. And have an impact. You don't require, I don't know, a lot of infrastructure, as I said before, or maybe company backing. All these things can like elevate collaboration and impact that you can have, but in open source, it's not like a requirement. So I think this is very interesting. And this maybe is already like one of the things to pick up, working at companies and so on. Like, how can you make this line easy, like at your company? If people are wondering about stuff, how can you bring those ideas or information to life. Right, and so I think like overall, we have like, if you on an abstract view, we have a network, of course. You have on the left side, people are just wandering, tinkering, experimenting, reading an article, learning about something, picking it up because it's open, it's public, you can use it, you can experiment with it. And then maybe some are building something on top of it, are using it at their work, or maybe are building their home lab or whatever, and then contributing like a library or I don't know, an issue to it or something. And over time this can become more complex, and it's like a self-strengthening space as well, right? So you have the more people contribute, the more different dots are there, and at the end it's about connecting dots, and then you can make change with connecting dots essentially. And if you don't know all the dots, you cannot connect it and you cannot have an impact. So openness enables innovation, that's sort of the idea, or something I believe to be observed. And I think this again is very interesting, right? So if you're at your company, how can people change processes or products if they're not aware of it? So what is your level of openness? And yeah, because otherwise people cannot be curious about learning more or fixing things. Is it just this dedicated team that needs to be aware of it, or maybe some other ones also have some stakes? I don't know. Maybe some ideas to think about. And yeah, overall, I think there are a lot of more motivations. At least for myself, I think it's like a mix of all of them or most of them. Why I contribute to open source or build open source communities, and think about this space. Yeah, tinkering, experimentation, I believe is like sort of like at the root, and then over time maybe some other ones. Also fellowship. You attend your first meetup and you, I don't know, like the exchange with other engineers and how it works. Right. So over time, we have all these different projects that are changing the IT landscape. We have ecosystems coming up, programming languages, frameworks, services, everything coming up. And the question is like, what are companies doing with it? So what is like the impact? Because one of the reasons to do open source is maybe also to have an impact on the IT space. So to, I don't know, build like a different type of database and I don't know, manage data differently. And yeah, so maybe we need to take a step back again, the same way that we did like with tinkering and why people are interested in open source. I think there's a couple of reasons why open source is possible to adopt, that it actually makes a difference in companies, or people can use it. And I think first of all it has something to do with like how we do software engineering. We capsule logic, we build components, we build nice interfaces, we avoid shallow components, have very nice deep components and so on. And this is definitely a good idea to manage your code and to deal with complexity. But it also makes it possible at the end to use open source, because we don't necessarily care about like where the interface or the project comes from. We care more about like what it does and if we can trust it. But if we know like it has a good quality in some ways and it does what it says, it doesn't really matter, right? So we just capsule the logic and move onwards. So that I think like efficiency and concentrating on your business value has something to do with this. Not reinventing the wheel. and also reducing the complexity you need to be aware of, because like if you have like an idea or a business or something that you want to do, but there's a lot of like fundamental stuff that you need to program. I mean, it's just a complexity that you cannot really tackle. It's so it helps with this as well. And right, so there's like a big prerequisite to open source, and that's basically that we do software engineering well. So if we do software engineering well, we split business logic from generic components and logic. So we do divide and conquer well. And this makes also open source possible, because if you want to share your work and collaborate with other ones, you need to have like some kind of generic logic, right? You need to extract the generic ideas and approaches and algorithms, and then people can build on top of it. People can inject their business idea and maybe some special algorithms on top of it, but all the fundamentals are something that you can import if they are existent. If not, there's an opportunity to start a new open source project, I would say. Right. And I already mentioned like fundamental a couple of times. So you can compare this space to fundamental research. So like in other scientific fields where you try to find like the universal truth about like how something works. Open source has like some similarities. In the digital space, you don't really have like universal truths in this way. I mean, you have like physics and stuff, but like how information is structured, I think there's a lot that you can define, invent, and think about. And open source is a bit about this, so that we share our fundamental ideas, how we can deal with technology and information in certain ways, how we can store information in a database and so on. So that's something that we don't invent over and over, but we have different ideas like how databases can store information, right? So yeah, we're setting like a basis, a general approach. And I think being like engaged with this is definitely like makes sense, but there's like a lot of different reasons, right? So companies like Google have a very different understanding from open source than maybe some other ones, right? So some companies have it like in their DNA. They're about having free access to services. They maybe want to dominate the market or want to set standards. They want to be first. So some other ones are using open source to generate business value, to have like different, build something on top of it, have like some kind of enterprise version, whatever it is, or maybe some other reasons, right? They just want to be independent, or they are concerned about transparency because people don't trust their service, so they set their algorithms public. It's maybe like a service where you have sensitive information, so you want to earn the trust of your customers. How can you earn the trust? You can give them all the logic, or I don't know, maybe the interesting part, some algorithms and stuff. So I think there's like a lot of different reasons. The engineering side, like increase software efficiency, reduce engineering complexity. I think this is like the core of engineering itself. And I think I don't know if it's like possible to ditch open source entirely and build something from the ground up. It's something that you probably don't want to do, and nobody really does. But there are like more things left and right why you may or may not want to increase your involvement in open source. Right. And not every company is obviously like a digital native. So everybody has like a different background, and a lot of companies do not have an software engineering background. Only like all the big tech companies, and then also a bunch of like other companies as well have now been sourced sort of with software engineering in mind and are building software as an enterprise product, maybe for other ones, or offering digital services and so on. But a lot of companies are not in this position, right? So they are going through the digitalization. They are trying to catch up, and so from what I can tell is like if companies are doing open source, I mean, maybe you can argue they catched up in a way. They are no longer just using software, but also shaping its future in a way. They have something to contribute. It's not just about, yeah, as I said, like catching up. It's about shaping your digital future as well. Yeah. Right. And I think there's like a big difference between companies that are just using open source like anybody else to do software engineering in the first place, essentially, or being sort of on the right side here, being active in the community, publicizing open source projects and shaping sort of like the fundamental part of how software is done, right? And if you are curious about like how can I start with this, I think there needs to be a bunch of prerequisites. So I think you need to have like some business context, right? I think for a lot of companies, you can argue it maybe does not make too much sense to invest heavily in open source. It's good to contribute and be part of it, but maybe open source is not directly like part of your strategy because maybe, I don't know, the business is just not that software heavy. You don't require on innovative software. It is okay if the software is a product that you consume from, I don't know, one of the tech giants. You don't, it's, yeah. So I think first of all, there needs to be like some business context driver, which requires you to pursue open source more actively. This could be, for example, like what was mentioned like in the previous slides, that you are digital sovereignty, for example, or you have maybe like some requirements around trust and transparency, or it's maybe something that is part of your company DNA. It's something which is part of your employees. Maybe it's something they brought up. It's something where you benefit because you get exposure and people are aware of your work. This could be also it. And then you need to have like some kind of strategy to support it, and then you can go through this stuff. Yeah. However, I think there's also a very differentiated approach to open source. So it's not just like you do it or you do not do it. Like as I said before, like if you do software engineering to some extent, you use open source anyways, but there's a big difference. You can also adopt open source in stages. So there's like different shades of gray, if you will. So for example, if you go from the left, you have proprietary software. You don't know anything about the software. You're not able to shape the software. You can maybe add like some recommendations to the software owner and have maybe even a partnership in some ways. You can maybe also pay for features. But you're not like in control, or you're not shaping your own digital future. You always need to go through somebody, and this can be good because you know the cost. You know upfront there's a release every half year, and you have a pretty high confidence that this is happening. The further you go to the right a bit, the further it is in your own hands, and you can take your own future in your own your own digital future in your own hands. And there's like different levels of support, right? So maybe you lose a bit of you gain control as more as you do open source. In some ways, maybe you increase the risk, but on the other hand side, you don't. You also are able. You're putting yourself into a position to be a digital leader, right? So it's like what I wrote before. I believe like if you want to be a digital leader in your field, if you want to innovate, you need to shape open source as well. Right. So how is this done? So there's like all the interest from companies. They have different business models and so on. And there are the interest from contributors. So they just want to innovate and push projects. And there's like one idea that like sustainable change happens if there's pressure from the top and the bottom. Doesn't really matter like top or bottom where it's at, but it just means, or it can be understood or interpreted, that you need to work from different sides, right? So you have on the one side, you have the maintainers that are building software, that are giving like the possible in some ways, and companies are picking up the generic infrastructure and landscape and thinking about, okay, how can I drive business value? They are putting in the sort of the work in some ways, and then together change happens, right? I mean, you can draw this picture also differently, but I think this is like a very nice approach to look at things. I mean, in the company it's the same, right? So you have your I don't know, the management with some strategy, with some vision. They have like hopefully some idea where we are heading to, and they are supporting the way ahead, supporting upcoming topics, and changing the business to be competitive, to gain more traction, to use different technology, to try out new stuff. So they're giving the support and also the framework, and then there's the interest, ingenuity, and curiosity of employees, hopefully, that want to change stuff, and then together you push things forward. And I think the same thing also happens in open source. And I think in general it's something to be mindful of, that it's this together to actually drive change. So if you want to progress further, perhaps think in this direction. And the same thing also is in open source. So you have, as I said before, the companies on the one hand side, and the other hand side you have the maintainers, different interests, and in the middle you have like this neutral ground where you have foundations, open source software foundations usually, and they give basically, right, they sort of empower and elevate contribution, sort of boost the maintainers in their work, for example by giving them some kind of platform, organizing events, sharing the work with other ones and so on, or maybe also sponsoring maintainers. And on the other hand side you have end users, project adopters, so companies that are looking into these projects, thinking this is very interesting, I would like to use it. And but I have a couple of complaints or some things I noticed. So for example, security reviews is something where we want to have more trust in the long-term development, and so on and so forth. And the foundation is sort of like in the middle, is like the neutral ground to collaborate, so that change happens at the end, right? And this is like an example, something that drew up from CNCF. So you have like on the left side, you have the end users and adopters. On the bottom, you have the projects, and on the right, you have the contributors and maintainers. And the foundation is sort of like in between, right? So there's like committees, for example, the end user technical advisory board. The idea is that there's a lot of learnings also happening in companies, a lot of interesting observations, and we would like to bring this into discussion. So we have a couple of people that are using the software a lot, have very interesting insights, and can share sort of their ideas. Then we have, on the other hand side, the technical oversight committee, usually, yeah, a bit more closer to the projects. They're thinking about, okay, how mature is the project? Can we push this further in the maturity level? What are the next projects? Is this project ready to be to be sandboxed, and so on? They're extended by the techno advisory groups, and as well we have ambassadors, with some of them being maintainers themselves or contributors, or maybe in some way active in the community, or maybe are representing also end users to some extent. And all this is like sort of like the neutral body. It's about collaborating on software, and I think this is very interesting. And just to think about like what is like your neutral body to collaborate like at your company. Is this like even a thing? Why not? I don't know. I think we can, if we are looking more into these structures, I think we can learn a lot. Like that software can be like developed in a lot of different ways, right? We don't necessarily need to have daily stand-up meetings and so on, or I don't know, Kanban boards or some other way, right? So maybe it works, maybe it does not. I think the point being is that these processes are something which you can change. Right. And this is my last slide. So maybe like some ideas, some further ideas. So if you want to be a leader in software and tech, you should look into open source, because with open source you sort of you take your own digital future in your own hands. You are not relying on other ones to do the job for you. You're taking leadership. You're doing the engineering work, or at least, I mean, part of the engineering work, right? You can work on the software which is special for you, where you observed this is like generic structures, I don't know, some kind of new database, whatever it is, a protocol, some kind of whatever, and shape it for your setting. Think about, is this like something that others can benefit too? Because if you can share with others, they will pick it up, and at the end it will also benefit you again. That's, I think, the first point. Open source is not just about project and tech, but also about other forms of working together and collaboration. And yeah, I think we should not just look at in terms of tech and adopting it as a library and so on. It's a different type of work, and I think in the light where we think more about sustainability, not just in climate and environment terms, but also in terms of also economic sustainability, that we want to innovate and so on, but also social sustainability, that we have like environment where people can be themselves and be respectful and so on, but also have like the freedom to create and freedom to build. And I think all of this goes hand in hand. Open source is definitely not perfect, but I think it gives like a different idea, right? So it sets a different context, and I think we can learn from this and perhaps bring some ideas into our companies. And then lastly, processes are not set in stone. If open source is not yet like a thing at your company, software, like how you do software, can change as well. If you like see that software is like essential to your future success, to be innovative in the future, you may want to take a closer look and change your structures, rely less maybe on proprietary software, or just use it like differently. As I said before, I think there's like a huge gray area. You don't need to be like full on the left or full on the right side, just full on open source or full on the other. It doesn't really matter. There's, I think, a lot of space in between. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you for listening. If you have like any ideas, as I said before, any comments about this, feel free to reach out, and maybe see you in person at one of the open source conferences. I don't know. Thank you.